G7 foreign ministers are meeting in Japan as we speak. And they're making dramatic statements. They're issuing threats. They say Russia will be slapped with more sanctions and countries that help Russia will face consequences. But it all sounds hollow when you look at how Russia is faring. It has found ways to bypass sanctions. Russia has proved that it doesn't need the West to trade. Let me tell you about Moscow's latest win. This came in Bangladesh. Dhaka wants to do business with Moscow and they're ready to pay Moscow in the Chinese yuan. So Bangladesh will make payments to Russia in the Chinese currency. They've bypassed the dollar. And we're talking about a major payment here, worth some $300 million. It will be denominated in the yuan. Do you know what this payment is for? A nuclear power plant. Russia is building a power plant for Bangladesh. It is located near the capital city of Dhaka. The project is worth around $12 billion. It is being financed through a Russian loan. And Bangladesh has 28 years to repay this loan. Right now, it is returning a part of the loan. That's $300 million. Dhaka was supposed to make the payment earlier, but Western sanctions delayed it. You see, Russia has been cut off from the global banking system. So they started looking for alternatives. First, Russia wanted the payment in rubles. It was hesitant to accept the yuan. It feared losses after currency conversion. But Dhaka refused to accept this arrangement, so there was a deadlock. It lasted for over a year. Now it seems Russia has changed its mind. It is ready to accept the Chinese yuan, and Bangladesh is happy to pay in the yuan. But why does Bangladesh prefer the yuan? For multiple reasons. For starters, yuan is one of the official currencies of Bangladesh. Since 2017, Dhaka has been adding the yuan to its currency reserves. But when compared with the dollar, the share of the yuan is minor. In 2017, just 1% of Bangladesh's reserves were in yuan. In August last year, this went up to 1.32%. What about the US dollar? Its share has declined over time. In 2017, 81% of Bangladesh's reserves were in the greenback, 81%. In 2022, this went down to 75%. So while the shift is minor, it is still significant. Dhaka has started to like the yuan. In September last year, the Bangladesh Bank issued orders. This is the Central Bank of Bangladesh. It issued instructions for all commercial banks in the country. It said they could maintain accounts in the yuan, also settle cross-border transactions in the Chinese currency. Last month, Dhaka made another move. The focus this time was on the exporters. They were allowed to hold some of their proceeds in the yuan. This is de-dollarization in action. Bangladesh is just the latest case study. In recent months, many countries have dumped the dollar. In the month of March, for instance, Brazil abandoned the greenback. China and Brazil are using their national currencies to trade now. Recently, Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, gave a speech. He openly criticized the hegemony of the US currency. Now, Lula wants the BRICS to come up with its own currency. BRICS, as you would know, is a grouping of leading emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are the members. And Russia, too, is pushing the BRICS. It wants the group to challenge the US dollar. Now, Bangladesh's move may give this push a new momentum. It only confirms what the world already knows, that Russia is not a pariah state. It has a place in the global economy, and it remains an important player. The West may not want to do business with Russia, but there are other countries who do. And they're coming up with alternative ways to settle trade deals. India, too, is in this mix. India wants to deepen trade ties with Russia. The Russian trade minister was in Delhi yesterday, and he said Moscow and New Delhi are discussing a trade deal, a free trade agreement. It could be in the works. India is a key buyer of Russian oil. It also buys key defense supplies from Russia. And this is likely to continue. Then what is the need for a trade deal now? Well, Russia is interested in buying several Indian goods. Reports say their wish list includes more than 500 products from India. So a Russia-India trade deal will make these purchases easier. It will also accelerate the pivot away from the US dollar. Our lead story tonight is more bizarre than a Hollywood plot. The US has been infiltrated. Do you know by whom? The Chinese police. I know it sounds impossible, but it has happened. A major Chinese operation has been busted in New York. Beijing has set up secret police stations in the city of New York. These stations were used to threaten and hunt critics, also harass Chinese dissidents.
The NPS has repeatedly and flagrantly violated our nation's sovereignty, including by opening and operating a police station in the middle of New York City.
As dramatic as this is, it's not a first. America is not the first victim of such an operation. China has been setting up police stations around the world. This is a growing threat, a threat that the world needs to prepare for. So what are these Chinese police stations? And how do they operate on overseas soil? In which countries have they sprung up? We'll cover all of this tonight, starting with what we know about the Chinese operation in New York. It was discovered in Manhattan's Chinatown. This is a neighborhood in New York. America's main domestic security agency, the FBI, was investigating this outpost. Reports say the police station was set up in February 2022. It was operating in disguise. China says these outposts are basically service centers and they provide basic services to Chinese expats. You know, simple things like renewing a driving license. But in reality, these outposts operate like a police station. Two people were running the Chinese police station in New York. Their names are Liu Jianguang and Chen Jingping. Both live in New York. Both are believed to be Chinese agents. American authorities have arrested them. They face two charges: conspiring to act as agent of the Chinese government and obstruction of justice. These are the two charges against them. The second charge, obstruction of justice, proves the Chinese link. Apparently, both men have made an admission. They've confessed to deleting evidence. And what kind of evidence was this? This was secret correspondence. It was exchanged between the Chinese spies and their handler. Now, who was their handler? An official from China's Ministry of Public Security. That's the principal police authority in China. And this handler was giving directions to Chinese spies in New York. And those directions, those communications have now been deleted. That's because they found out that they were under investigation. They got some indications last year, so they tried to clean up their act. They deleted the communications. And by the end of 2022, they also closed the police station. But US authorities were hot on their heels. They managed to nab the Chinese spies. They also searched the police station and found some crucial evidence. Turns out these spies were involved in all kinds of illegal activities, from harassing Chinese dissidents to threatening Chinese fugitives and forcing them to return to China. They did all of it. In one of the cases, these spies were enlisted to locate a pro-democracy activist. So clearly, this was a spying operation, and now it has been busted.
The secret police station appears to have had a more sinister use. On at least one occasion, an official with the Chinese National Police directed one of the defendants, a U.S. citizen who worked at the secret police station, to help locate a pro-democracy activist of Chinese descent living in California. In other words, the Chinese National Police appear to have been using the station to track a U.S. resident on U.S. soil.
So that's the story of the Chinese police station in New York. But like I said, this is not limited to New York. Such stations are everywhere. Do you know how many? More than 100, according to reports. China has over 100 police stations operating illegally in 53 countries, and they all serve the same purpose. They're on the hunt for Chinese dissidents. Can you imagine the scale of this operation? China is running a police station in practically every corner of the world and getting away with it.
It is a long overdue law enforcement action to push back against China's transnational repression that have been taking place in the homeland here in the United States and as well as in Europe. The law enforcement, policymakers, governments in various capitals have been somewhat reluctant to take action on issues like this.
I have some data from April 2021 to July 2022, more than 230 Chinese nationals returned to China. They were charged in criminal cases and they returned home. China said these nationals have returned voluntarily, but experts believe the secret police stations played a role here. They allegedly forced these Chinese nationals to return home. What about India? Do such stations, Chinese police stations, exist in India? Thankfully, India is not on the list. So far, there is no evidence to suggest that China has a police station operational in India. But this is a growing threat, and the world is acknowledging it. As of December last year, 13 countries had begun a probe into such centers. It's a start, but it's not going to be enough, because these are all individual efforts. What we need is a united response, because this is an unprecedented challenge. China wants to police its nationals beyond its borders. And this has huge national security implications for other countries. China is violating the sovereignty of nations again. The evidence is mounting. What we need now is for world leaders to act. Before we begin our last story for the day, a quick quiz. What is 2/3 of 70? A football team has won 3 of their last 10 penalty shootouts. What is their success rate? And lastly, how many minutes are there in 1/12 of a day? Even if you do not know the answers, surely you know what the story is about. Mathematics. Some of us truly love it. But for others, it can be a weapon of mass self-esteem issues. Even the simplest of maths problems induce panic, embarrassment, resentment, or self-loathing. Because maths anxiety is real, on average about 20% of the world suffers from it. In the UK, it's officially the worst in the world, 40%. And it's becoming a problem for them. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wants to subtract the anxiety from maths. He loves his numbers, and he wants to take on that anti-maths mindset.
We make jokes about not being able to do maths. It's socially acceptable. We say things like, oh, maths, I can't do that, it's not for me, and everyone laughs. But we'd never make a joke like that about not being able to read. So we've got to change this anti-maths mindset.
Sunak has vowed to boost numeracy among Britons. Numeracy is the ability to work with numbers. At present, maths is compulsory up to the age of 16 in the UK. After that, students in the country in schools can drop out of maths. They can drop maths as a subject. But Prime Minister Sunak wants to change that. He wants to make maths education compulsory till the age of 18.
We're one of the few developed countries where young people don't routinely study some form of maths up to the age of 18. They do it in Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Finland, Japan, Norway, and America. Why should we accept any less for our children?
So how big is the UK's maths problem? Around 8 million adults in the country have skills of primary school children, meaning 8 million adults in the UK can handle numbers only as well as primary school children. And this is hurting their economy. According to estimates, lack of basic math skills is costing the British economy how much? About $25 billion a year. Right now, they can't afford this kind of loss. The UK economy is struggling, prices are skyrocketing, people are struggling to pay bills and to buy food to make ends meet. Workers are going on strikes. So Prime Minister Sunak wants to change things around, and he thinks maths can help.
Think about the cost of living, how important it is right now to understand what discounts are available. How do you make sure that your credit cards are being managed properly? What's the right mortgage deal to go for? All these things, so important for day-to-day life. And right now, there's probably too many people who don't have the numeracy they need to make those decisions that will support them and their families.
Some critics say this is hardly the strategy they need. Others say this is not even a coherent strategy. Irrespective, Sunak is moving forward. This is the second time he's spoken about maths this year. Previously, he called it a passion project. He says this matter is quote-unquote personal for him. Now, you know that the British Prime Minister is of Indian origin, and it's being said that his heritage may have something to do with it. Because there's a lot of emphasis on the study of mathematics in India. Indian students are perceived to be better at it than those in Western nations. And India has a legacy of extraordinary mathematicians. It is home to the likes of Aryabhat, Srinivas Ramanujan, and Shakuntala Devi. As Albert Einstein once famously said, we owe a lot to the Indians who taught us how to count. Because India gave the number 0 to the world, so the India variable may be part of the equation. Regardless, Rishi Sunak has pointed towards a bigger problem. Why are we so scared of maths? It takes root early and occurs due to different reasons, like being scolded by frustrated parents and teachers repeatedly, or not being able to grasp a foundational topic, which then makes it harder to catch up. We've all been there. It can be a soul-crushing experience. Sometimes it's also a policy issue. It can be difficult for some to follow the curriculum. Other times, the very relevance of maths is in question. How many times have you actually used the Pythagoras theorem in your life? Or calculated speed using a time and distance formula? We think we rarely use maths, but we may be wrong. Maths is usually at the front and center of most of the things we do. We can use it to fact check. Are politicians lying about unemployment? How many COVID vaccines have really been administered? We can use it to save money. Are discounts really benefiting us? Can taking a different travel route help us save time and money? We do such calculations all the time. So the problem is not that maths cannot help us. It is that we often don't know how to let it. Shakuntala Devi said, children dread mathematics because they see it as a subject, but mathematics is a language. And those who romanticize it say, the scary pure maths, with alphabets and symbols, is like poetry. How you use it depends on you. It can hold you back. It can also set you free. And as George Cantor once said, the essence of mathematics lies in its freedom. I think it also has a lot to do with your teacher. A good teacher can make maths fun. And before I wrap this story, here's an admission. I can give you quotes and analysis because I'm past the stage where I had to take maths tests. And I'd be lying if I said I'm not in a happier place. Dealing with maths can be tough. Here's hoping you are having a better time learning it. And leaders who offer policy solutions also push for ways to teach maths in more imaginative ways. Love has its limits. And when it comes to spy circles, this probably includes honey traps. You know the stratagem used by intelligence services, where spies exploit romance to gather secrets. Now it's evolving with modern times. Reports say Russian spies are using dating apps. They're targeting German politicians and soldiers. They're trying to get intelligence related to the war in Ukraine. And we'll talk about it tonight. But this strategy is not unique to them. And it's not new. Spies across countries and centuries have employed this method. In fact, honey trapping has existed for longer than you may think, probably longer than most Valentine's Day traditions. And history has some of the finest examples. Here's a report.
Love them or hate them, dating apps have become the reality of modern love. Most of us are mining them for romance, but some are doing it to topple governments and gain inside information on wars. People are spying with a swipe, and government officials are stuck in honey traps. We're talking about Russian spies. They're using dating apps like Tinder, swiping left and right, forming connections online, reportedly doing so to gain intelligence, mainly on the war in Ukraine. According to reports, their targets are German politicians and members of Bundeswehr, that's the German armed forces. Russian spies are trying to recruit them as sources of information. Why is this? Because Germany has been one of Ukraine's allies. Thousands of Ukrainian troops have been trained in the country. So for Russian spies, Germany is the obvious arena. And the German Federal Office has reports. Tinder is one of the most used platforms for this. But spies are also using social media to forge connections. And Russian spy levels are rising in the country. Germany now has as many of them as it did during the Cold War. And Russia is no stranger to openly using data from dating apps. It already uses Tinder to collect the data of its own citizens. Dating apps have also forged a connection with the war in Ukraine. Tinder users can pay for a feature, which allows them to talk to people in different countries. Some people are using it to speak to users in Russia, asking them about the war in Ukraine. So honey trapping and war share quite the love story. And it's been going on for decades now. Here are some examples. Mata Hari from World War I. She was a Dutch exotic dancer, convicted of spying on Germans. Later, she was tried and executed. Or look at the Cold War. The Soviet Union had a clandestine academy. It trained young Russian women in the art of honey traps. But don't misunderstand, both men and women are adept at setting a trap. After the Berlin Wall was built in 1961, male East German spies honey-trapped officials from the western parts. Honey trapping is a tool of choice in modern warfare too. Only now it's done on online dating apps. Last year, An Indian man was arrested for helping a Pakistani spy. They were in an online relationship, and he had no idea about her identity. During the same year, Australia issued a statement. Foreign spies were reportedly using Tinder to obtain sensitive intelligence. In 2020, the US said foreign intelligence services may use data from dating apps. And China is not far behind. Its honey trap is so vast, Britain's MI5 has a 14-page document of safety protocol against it. When it comes to honey traps, there are far too many stories, too many dramas, and many ruined lives. No amount of training, integrity, patriotism, and cleverness has acted as a defense against them. The victims refuse to believe the reality, even when presented with evidence. That's exactly why honey traps have a legacy of being successful. Remember, in this battlefield of love, your next match could be a spy. So if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Speaking of America and its problematic allies, Turkey got some good news on Monday. The US has cleared an F-16 upgrade package for them. The deal is worth around $259 million. As you would expect, the State Department is sticking to the routine script. Turkey is a long-standing NATO ally, and the package will increase interoperability. All true, but that's not the full story. The US and Turkey have been playing an interesting game. On the one hand, it's no secret that Joe Biden does not like Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In 2020, in fact, he called Erdogan an autocrat, even suggested helping the Turkish opposition parties. His predecessor, Donald Trump, had better relations. And yet, in late 2020, he slapped CAATSA sanctions on Turkey. CAATSA stands for Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. Here's how it works. Suppose you buy weapons from America's enemy countries, say Russia or Iran or North Korea. You buy weapons from them. Then the US government is empowered to impose sanctions on you. That's what Trump did with Turkey. In 2017, Erdogan signed a deal to buy S-400 missiles from Russia. 2 years later, the sanctions from America came. It was America's way of keeping Erdogan in check. But the war in Ukraine changed the equation. Suddenly, the US needed Turkey for two things. One, to mediate between Russia and Ukraine, and two, to approve NATO's Nordic expansion. Without Erdogan's green light, Finland and Sweden could not join NATO. And that meant advantage Erdogan. Last month, he did approve Finland's entry, but Sweden is still waiting in line. So reports say this F-16 package is supposed to be a positive signal, sort of like a nudge. But the question is, will Erdogan be satisfied with this? Because he has set his eyes on a much larger package. In 2021, the Turkish president proposed a $20 billion deal. Turkey would buy new F-16 jets and 80 modernization kits. That deal has been stalled by the US Congress. Why? Because they want assurances from Erdogan first. One is obviously the NATO expansion. The second is normalizing tensions with Greece. And third is not invading Syria. You may remember Erdogan issuing threats of invading Syria last year. It came to nothing in the end. If Erdogan gives these assurances, he may get the swanky new F-16s, but ultimately it's a question of how much leverage he has. Next month is election time in Turkey. Erdogan has already accused the West of trying to meddle. In fact, he's asked voters to, quote-unquote, teach the United States a lesson. Despite this rhetoric and the CAATSA sanctions, America seems powerless. It's a classic example of a bad marriage. On the one hand, the West gives Erdogan weapons and financial aid. On the other, he's slapped with sanctions. So election results in May won't just be consequential for Turkey. They could also reshape the country's relationship with NATO and the US. Our next story is out of Germany. Former Chancellor Angela Merkel is back in the spotlight. Yesterday, she was given her country's top civilian honor. It's the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. She received the Grand Cross First Class Special Issue, and Merkel became only the third chancellor to get this award. But it wasn't without controversy. Her contributions to her country are now being debated, especially regarding Germany's ties with Russia. Some are even questioning whether she really deserved Germany's top honor and whether politicians should be awarded for doing their jobs. Here's more.
Angela Merkel, Germany's Iron Lady, the first woman to have helmed Europe's largest economy, the one who steered both Germany and Europe through turbulent times. That's one take on her legacy, and it's this persona that's being rewarded. Yesterday, Merkel was given Germany's top civilian honor. She received the Grand Cross First Class Special Issue of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. She was honored by Germany's President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. He was full of praise for Germany's former leader.
16 Jahre lang.
For 16 years, you served Germany with ambition, with wisdom, with passion. For 16 long years, you worked for freedom and democracy, for a country and the well-being of its people, tirelessly and sometimes to the limits of your physical strength.
Und für das Wohlergehen seiner Menschen gearbeitet.
The award has been given to a German chancellor only 2 times in the past, so it was a special occasion. Guests included current Chancellor Olaf Scholz and European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. Merkel thanked her family and several aides when she accepted the honor.
People often talk about what snake pit politics is. I can say that I would not have survived if it were not for the other side of politics. That's why I have always been able to enjoy it. Thank you, Mr. President.
The crowd applauded Merkel's contributions, but of course, not everyone was happy about her getting awarded. Many have been criticizing Merkel of late, especially her role in making Germany dependent on Russian gas. Merkel had pushed for Germany to substitute nuclear energy for Russian natural gas. In light of the Ukraine war, she's been facing flack for not having a plan B in place. During his speech, the German president spoke about the changed political landscape of today.
Putin's Russia has reduced the European security order to rubble. The peace on our continent, for which you, like many of their predecessors in the Chancellery, have worked for years and decades, February 24, 2022, has not only changed Europe, it has changed the world, and with it our view of the years of German and European politics before. It is important that we learn our lessons from this. Today we must think differently, act differently.
Was the German president trying to protect Merkel's legacy by saying those things? He is, after all, an ally. Steinmeier served as both Vice-Chancellor of Germany and Minister of Foreign Affairs under Merkel. To criticize her would mean accepting his own role in the failure of Germany-Russia ties. This isn't Merkel's only policy that has come under scrutiny. Her stance on refugees is being criticized too. Her 2015 decision to welcome hundreds of thousands of refugees from Syria and Iraq is being slammed. Critics say it was humane, but it led to instability in Germany. But as they say, hindsight is 20/20. It'll take years to truly assess the impact Merkel had on Germany. Some of her decisions may seem obviously wrong now, but at the time she was doing what she thought was best. Which brings us to the next point. Why is Merkel being honored now, so soon after her term ended? Critics say it's too early to judge her time at the helm. Again, it'll take years to really see how her policies shape Germany. So to award her now seems like an act of flattery, as is often the case when it comes to honoring politicians. We're not talking about dictators racking up honors presented by their lackey institutions, but about democratic leaders who continuously seem to be showered with praise. Bridges, highways, stadiums everywhere bear their names. They proudly wear domestic orders of merit, mostly for just doing their jobs. National leaders are always going to forever change a country, in a good or bad way, sometimes both. So if their public impact is guaranteed, do they really need the medals?
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, Here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.